That's a little loud. Can you guys hear me in the back of the room okay? All right, perfect. So thanks for joining us. I know we are next door to Mark R, and really makes me happy to see so many of you that did make the journey from there to here. But we're here to talk to you today about Zero Trust. Specifically, Microsoft Endpoint Management and how it's essential in your Zero Trust strategy. My name's Clay Taylor. I'm a Principal Program Manager on the Intune team. I work with customers like you every day, and to be honest, looking out in the crowd, I see at least half of you that I've probably talked to or worked with in the past. We work on implementing Intune, SCCM, and other products in the M365 catalog. I want to start out with a quick exercise just to see if everyone's awake. So, for those who can see my shoes and my shirt, what's my favorite color? So, everyone who said blue or azure, you all fail. Time to go home. You trusted me. You trusted my clothes. This is about zero trust. And with zero trust, we mean zero trust. But I also have one of the customers that I've worked with extensively on this strategy and on this mindset, Bridgewater, with me on stage. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But these guys have really looked at zero trust as a mindset. And they're going to be talking about that today. But I really wanted someone to actually, hear from not just the Microsoft side, but from the customer side as well. Anthony and Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. I'm Anthony, and this is Paul. We're from Bridgewater Associates. If you're not familiar with Bridgewater's been in business for about 40 years. Our success is built on our unique culture of radical truth and radical transparency. We currently manage about $160 billion in assets and over 300 institutional clients. Examples of that are pension funds or charitable foundations. At Bridgewater, Paul and myself are responsible for keeping our company and our users productive and secure. And so I'm really excited to share a bit of our experience with you today, and hopefully we can assist you on some of your journey. So thanks.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Anthony. And I'm Mayank Jain. I handle marketing and product management for Microsoft Endpoint Manager now. We used to be called Intune. And I'll come back a little later with some of the underlines around what Paul and Anthony have to share with you.
All right, so session objectives. First of all, we're basically here to introduce the concept of zero trust to you and learn why it's needed and why we had to go this path. We're going to also learn about why Intune is integral into your zero trust implementation, and finally, why M365 is the only complete suite of products to enable zero trust end-to-end. So let's start with what is a zero trust model. First, I want to say that zero trust really is conceptual. This is going to be a conceptual conversation, at least in the first half, because it really is this idea that can be implemented many different ways. It eliminates the concept of trust based on the network location within a perimeter. And it also leverages device and user trust claims to gate access to data and resources using things like conditional access. Let's start with some harsh realities of perimeter-based networks. Perimeter-based networks only trust users inside the network. That being said, if a user or device is inside that network, you have a single point of attack that can threaten the security of the entire network. And finally, and I've heard this so many times this week, end-user IT teams and security teams use separate and disjointed tools that just don't talk to each other or play well together. So what are the benefits of a zero trust model? Basically, we're going to be using conditional access to ensure that your high-value resources are accessible only from a compliant and healthy device. We're going to prevent network access and lateral movement using stolen credentials or a compromised device. And finally, to me the most important part, we're going to enable users to be more productive by working where they want, how they want, and when they want. And the zero trust mindset comes down to 3 pillars. The first is trust but verify. Raise your hand if you think trust but verify is a pretty good pillar to start with. It's a horrible pillar to start with. Zero trust means zero trust. Instead of trust but verify, we're going to verify explicitly. This means we're going to be looking at the identity at all the different levels. Identity, location, device health, data classification, anomalies. Next, we're going to be looking at using least privilege access. We've been hearing the term least privilege for at least 15 years. As I was looking at zero trust and as I've been implementing it, I was sitting there thinking, why have we been saying this over and over again, but we haven't actually applied it to the network layer? Like, why do we keep saying, hey, we're going to do least privilege on documents or on apps? Who has access to what? But we actually give everyone access to the corporate network. Finally, assume breach. Assume breach basically just means limit your blast radius. Really focus on preventing lateral movement, making sure the data is encrypted and protected if it's compromised, and just really limiting how much attack surface you have available. So we've looked at the 3 pillars. Let's break those down into 6 major components. The first is identity. With identity, zero trust requires that I authorize and authenticate users using strong authentication and making sure that they are logging in from a typical location or means, and also that we're logging, auditing, and policing that. We're also going to be using conditional access to make sure that that user only has access to the data they need access to. Because, or after a user has authenticated, this means that the data will then flow to multiple different device types. This could be IoT devices, this could be servers, this could be cloud servers as well. With zero trust, because of this data flow and because it's going to all these different devices and device types, it gives us this huge attack surface that we have to protect. And we protect that using conditional access with device health attestation and device compliance rules. The application plane. Basically, we are replacing the traditional VPN with proxy or VDIs. We're configuring single sign-on for cloud apps, and we're looking to discover shadow IT. We're also applying application-level controls to prevent unauthorized access or to prevent data from traversing from one application to another. Infrastructure. Infrastructure, even though, in a zero trust model where we're really talking about how to protect your cloud resources, infrastructure really plays a big part here. The main focus here is just-in-time access, making sure your infrastructure is up to date and patched, and also implementing controls to automatically block and flag anomalous behavior. Network, and I also hear this referred to as location, comes down to not trusting your internal network, making sure that all of your sessions are encrypted end-to-end, and limiting access through policy. Finally, the thing that we're really trying to protect in the zero trust model is data. We're moving from this perimeter-driven protection, or network-driven protection, to data-driven protection. We're making sure that we classify and label data using machine learning with tools like Microsoft Information Protection, and we're dynamically determining who should be accessing the data and what they should be accessing. So all of this is here today. This isn't something that is something you can't actually go and implement. Anthony and Paul are going to come talk about how they've actually implemented this already at Bridgewater. We just had a Zero Trust Summit in Redmond a few months ago, about a month ago. And we had around 30 customers who came to town and talked about their zero trust journey. We would really, really be interested in talking to others about this because we really want to make sure that we're understanding all the scenarios. As Mayank will talk about in a little while, there's many different ways to implement a zero trust model, and we know it's not going to be the same across the board, but we really do want to work with other customers at Microsoft to make sure that we're understanding all of the scenarios. So with that, Anthony.
Thanks, Clay. Just a sip of water here. All right. Before I explain my artwork, I just want to quickly poll the room. How many folks in here are security professionals? Just show of hands. A few. How many folks are IT professionals? Majority. Great. And then who's going to Universal Studios tonight? Just about everyone. And then just to kind of finish this out, who's just kind of getting started in here learning today and hasn't started the Zero Trust journey or transformation? All right. And then who's kind of in the midst of building their strategy within their own company? Very cool. And then who's actually done the transformation or as well along the way of executing it? 2, 3, handful? Cool. So it seems like we're pretty evenly distributed, but everyone's just getting started. So to the fish tank, I think of the perimeter-based network like being stuck inside this giant fish tank. There's a giant net on top, and it mostly creates a lot of pain. It creates pain from the users because it continually falls drastically short of their expectations on what's possible and what they expect. They want to be mobile. They want to be able to collaborate with people internal and external to your business, and they want to be able to be productive on no matter what device they're on, where they're coming from, what boundary they're in or outside of, and they just want everything to work and be reliable. From the technologists, it really inhibits your ability to leverage how the world is moving forward and keeps your focus away from your own business problems internally. And so you just toil away maintaining the technology, focusing on the next upgrade or the next version coming out instead of actually solving problems that are hitting your users and important to your business. And then from security team, as I know because my security guy is sitting right in the front row, any access to the tank from the outside is a growing risk. And your threat layer is growing and growing and growing, and so you have to monitor your egress and ingress points constantly and keep residual risk low. And so I've had the opportunity to sit with Clay at some roundtables this week, and then the good news is I've heard a lot of similar stories to this, as this was our story probably, 18 months ago about Gary? Yeah. And you're not alone. There's lots of people that are facing these problems right now, and then these problems can be solved. And so just to tell you a little bit about how we thought about it. These layers look really familiar. We've been working with Microsoft for a long time on all of this stuff, and I think the way to do it is by adopting a layer approach. This is a little bit of our approach, and for me, it's just a framework for how to think about precisely about what controls, policies, sensors you need at each layer to gain access to your corporate resources. And so what should you do and where should you start? What advice can I give you? Take the time to deeply understand the frameworks and concepts that are laid out in this talk, and then apply them to your business. They're not just buzzwords, they're an actually different way of thinking. And so you need to kind of change the way that everyone's thinking, both on your team and around you. Work with your organization to create a shared understanding of what specific problems you're solving for, because they may be different. It could be that all of your users are in pain and they're about to come at you with pitchforks. It could be that you have always allowed everyone to be actually super productive, but your security, you have a CISO who's saying the risks are in at intolerable levels. Or it could be some hybrid approach of that, but you really need to have those problems enumerated and laid out before you get going. And so that you, through the actual journey and transformation, you remember what you're solving for. And then number 3, I would say, is get support and buy-in from both company leadership, the security team, security leadership, your CISOs, and then all of your peers in technology. Because as you march through these layers, it's going to affect, depending on how your organization is set up, it's going to affect you and different people in your organization in different ways. And then finally, be clear about the risks that you need to solve for and protect against. Then apply appropriate policy and controls against those risks to land in an acceptable residual risk zone. I'm going to say and underscore this, appropriate policy to protect against appropriate amounts of risks, because that's the key here. You don't want to overkill on one end or underkill on the other end, and you've got a lot of tools and controls that we'll discuss to be able to execute that well. And before I kick it over to Paul for an actual demo of how to configure some of these types of things that we've been talking about so far and set this up, I've got some practical advice based on our experience. And so what I've done here is lay out a slide that on the left of the slide are examples of a bunch of M365 technologies that come out of the box. I didn't take the time to enumerate them all, but I try to do a pretty good job there. And then on the right are technologies that apply to all. Now, Clay's already mentioned some of these, and I'm going to start on the right side. Conditional access and Microsoft Security Graph are 2 foundational parts of this strategy that we've found are super effective in helping you get there. The Security Graph not only provides analysis and insights, but allows you to dynamically respond to the changing threat landscape as it updates, changes, and affects your environment on any given day. Now, conditional access will complement that and allow you to create and enforce policies across multiple layers based on the changes in that landscape. And so if I just give you a very quick example to walk you through some of the layers here, imagine if I've set up this in my company, and I'm just a user who wants to connect to Office 365 to edit Word, do some stuff in Word Online or SharePoint Online, and just get to work. So if I start with authentication at the identity layer, I'm going to type in, log onto my laptop, open it up, open my browser, and through Azure AD and Azure SSO, it's going to authenticate me to Office 365. Okay, easy. But what's happening in the background is Azure Identity Protection is actually looking, because I've created conditional access policies to see if my risk score has risen. Does it want to pop me or block me for MFA or anything like that? As I come down to the device layer, because I'm coming from something like an Intune managed device that's Azure AD joined and has Defender ATP running on it, my device is assessed for compliance, right? And so through that, if my device is compliant and meets all my company's requirements, I'm then granted access to that system. From a user perspective, that takes less than 5 seconds, like your normal SSO procedure. There's no added overhead to that at all. And then the services layer, if I'm happily working away, I'll just like highlight Office ATP, and I get a phishing attack. I click on a malicious link by accident, whether that's in Word or Teams or Outlook, and then I'm blocked from actually accessing that and potentially giving my credentials away or sensitive information away. And then at the data layer, if you've taken the time to actually lay out an MIP strategy and go down a good data protection strategy within 365, even if you just did policies and labels on some documents, what you would be able to then do is say, I want to send Clay an email, and I happen to accidentally attach the wrong attachment to that, and that happens to be highly confidential. I think a lot of people can empathize with that and like have had those oh shit moments. And basically, what MIP will protect you from, because you were smart enough to put some transport rules on Exchange Online, is actually letting that document egress from your company. And so that's kind of just like the basic user practical example of how you could see this strategy in action. And so now I'll kick it over to Paul, and he'll actually give you a demo. Oh, and Clay, what was the use case that we were going to give Paul yesterday? Did you give him one?
All right, so let me think of something here that I've been hearing a lot of lately. So Paul, let's protect our Exchange Online access for our Windows devices and our iOS devices using conditional access. Let's start with that.
Cool. All right. So I'm just going to get started here. Conditional access blade, create a new conditional access policy. And we'll call it restrict Exchange Online to Corp, iOS, and Windows only. Cool. So the first thing I do here, I go into the assignment. So I can target all users, I can target specific groups of users, I can even target directory roles. So for the purpose of this, since it's going to be company-wide, I'm going to pick all users. Just as a best practice note, you should always have like a break glass account that you're excluding from conditional access policies, just in case you screw something up. You don't want to lock yourself out. So now, this part, I can pick all cloud apps or select. So for this, we're targeting Exchange Online. Pretty straightforward. Exchange Online. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. So in the conditions platform, I have a lot of different levers that I can pull. So this first one, device platforms. So intuitively, you would think that I would pick any Windows and iOS here. I'm not going to do that. Because I'm going to use the grant control down here of compliant device. Compliant device means it's registered in Intune and it's compliant. If it's not registered in Intune, it can never be compliant. So what I've done in Intune previously in this environment is I've kind of blocked everything else other than Windows and iOS. So it's a nice effective control here. I pick any device. If you did want to do an explicit block, what you would actually do is you would pick any device and exclude Windows and iOS, and then pick a block control down here. You wouldn't want to actually just include Android, Windows Phone, and Mac OS because you'd be missing out things like Linux or any OSs that are not reporting when they're trying to authenticate. Just some best practice tips there. Okay, so I'm picking any device here. Done. So I happen to know, even though Clay gave me this kind of broad condition, that I have some legacy on-prem users still. They're not managed by Intune, therefore they can never be compliant, so I can account for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, target any location, but I'm going to exclude an on-premise location, my on-premise sites that I previously set up. And this can be just a list of egress IPs for your on-premise sites. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to leave client apps alone for now, but in production, you would probably want to get a little bit more granular here. For this purposes of this demo, I'm just going to pick everything. Things like iOS, you may want to exclude the browser because you can't apply man policies to that, restricting copy and paste, but I'm going to show you another way to do that in a sec. So I'm just going to target everything. I'm going to leave device state alone for now. So get down to the grant controls. You can see I have a lot of different options here. The one I'm going to pick for this is basically require the device to be marked as compliant. So what does that mean? I mentioned before it has to be enrolled in Intune and pass your compliance policies. So I'm just going to bounce over, show you what options you have here. So you can do things like require it has BitLocker, require secure boot is enabled. You can require it has antivirus, anti-malware, it has a password, Defender DAT files are up to date. This is a really cool one I want to show you. So this is kind of like shows how everything is connected together with M365. So this actually takes a feed from Defender. If the machine has been attacked by malware, ran suspicious PowerShell scripts, the threat level will raise. So I can basically say if the device is not medium or below, is not compliant, therefore will be blocked by Exchange. I'm just going to bounce back here and show you a couple other things. So let's finish this out, create it. I'm done. I just want to highlight a couple other things here. So layering on an additional conditional access policy. So you can layer these on to stack controls for different targets. So this is another Exchange Online policy. I'm targeting iOS only for this one. And now I'm requiring another two access controls. So this works in conjunction with the other ones, so it already includes compliant device, and I'm also requiring an approved client app. This means you have to use a Microsoft client, so Outlook for iOS, where I can subject it to man policies, controlling copy and paste, where I can download files, where I can share files. And then this last one I'm really excited about. We work really closely with Microsoft on this. This actually ensures that that man policy is in place before you grant access. So if you screwed up somewhere in the policy, you excluded somebody unintentionally, you didn't apply an EMS license for some reason, it would fail closed rather than failing open. Speaking of that, if you did want to fail a little bit more open, depending on your company and your posture, you can do this kind of policy. So what I'm doing here, I'm actually leveraging device state, which I went over before. So I'm including all, and I'm excluding devices being marked as compliant. So this will cover the rest. And rather than a grant control, I'm actually going to implement a session control. What this means is this will redirect the user to the MCAS through the browser. The MCAS will be in line, and then they're subject to MCAS policy, which is the Microsoft Cloud Access security broker. So I'm just going to show you an example of some policies there. So for this one, I'm actually saying block all downloads for non-compliant devices for SharePoint and Exchange Online. So that's easy. It's easy to do that as that. Just close out. Some other things. Block legacy authentication. Very important to do. Legacy auth bypasses conditional access to make sure it's turned off in your tenant. And then I'll show you something that links to Azure Identity Protection. So as you mentioned, sign-in risk, this is dynamic. This is updating all the time. If account is compromised, I think you've seen in some of the other sessions, about 99% of account compromises could have been blocked by MFA. So this is basically targeted towards that. If a user account goes into medium or high risk, I'm effectively saying require MFA for every single cloud app. I think that's it. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. All right. So thank you for that, Paul. Now we're going to talk about how other customers have approached moving to a zero trust environment using the zero trust mindset? Mayank?
Thank you. That was really nice, Paul. Thank you. It's amazing how you guys can make throats go dry. I'll need some water. Give me 1 second to keep it here. Yeah, like I tweeted a little while ago, this is my first time on an Ignite stage, so you're my first ever audience at Microsoft. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so like I said before, my job here is to kind of underline the parts of what our friends at Bridgewater shared with you earlier. We kind of flipped the order, so we let you see how they did it first before we get into how the technology is. Some of you who may be new to this may have been wondering about the terms that Paul was using, some of the things like MAM and MDM. What does it mean? What are these different products and how they work together? So over the next 10, 15 minutes or so, that's what I think we'll try and cover. So you saw one approach from Anthony. These are some other approaches. Typically, this is what the state looks like. A lot of our customers, a lot of you probably are on the left-hand side in that orangish yellow box, which is what we call the traditional state in the zero trust model. And the blue part is where you want to go, which is the zero trust state. In the traditional state, you have Windows 10, you've got maybe Office 2016 or Office 2019, the on-prem Office. It's usually SCCM managed. You typically have micro-segmentation in order to do network security. You've got firewalls, proxies, VPNs, those kind of things to control the network of your security. Then on the zero trust side of things, you will typically end up with a high performance device like a Surface or another high performance laptop or mobile device. You would have the Office Pro Plus. You would have things like Microsoft Teams or OneDrive, other apps that have the Microsoft Intune protection built in, so that you can get the app level protection, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail in a couple of minutes. Then you would start getting the benefits of conditional access, the benefits of Microsoft Defender, ATP, all of the same protection, not just on Windows, but also on iOS, Android, and other platforms. And the way that some of our customers have taken to go from this transformation is Intune MAM. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that is, but very briefly, MAM is a way to give that protection at the application level. So when you use application controls, it's almost transparent to your user. So when you're going from an on-premises deployment, and now you want to start allowing a BYOD program, or you want to start allowing mobile devices into your network, one way to do that would be to manage every device, right? What we call mobile device management, or MDM. But that is a little disruptive. Some users may take some more time to get used to it. But when you do a mobile application management, the mobile device continues to be just the way it is. But the corporate data, the corporate apps that you're sending down to them, so if you're publishing Office, or you're sending them Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, Outlook Mobile, Edge, those applications are protected through these policies internally. So as far as the user is concerned, they see no change. They just see an Outlook icon, they click on it, they use it, but as the IT admin, that it's being protected. So that gives you a nice, gentle bridge to go to that state. Another scenario that is very common in some of our customers, Clay mentioned the Zero Trust Summit, and that's where we heard some of these examples. Some customers who are more on-premises based, who have a lot of configuration manager deployments, they have used the Configuration Manager Cloud Management Gateway, or CMG, to give that remote access to the on-prem resources. So the important thing here is that this eliminates the need for VPN, because what VPN does is that gives you access to the entire network, and that becomes a point of vulnerability for you. So using the CMG, you still start getting the benefits of the zero trust model. You start enabling the remote collaboration and the productivity that Anthony spoke of, but at the same time, you're not fully there yet. So at the end of this presentation, we have a slide which will give you links to some of the resources. And this chart is from a particular ebook that we've written recently. The Azure Active Directory team has published that. They had a session on it as well. And that really goes deeper into what these different approaches are. You'll see that what I was talking about, the traditional, the advanced, and the optimal. And then it's not just about device management, even though that's what this session is for, because we work on that. But your security, your zero trust security really depends on all of this being successful together, across those layers. This is a snapshot of the way that we do it at Microsoft. So this is again, this is from a different white paper. You can see the link at the bottom. It'll be clearer when you download this. But you'll start to notice it's not very different from the various approaches that we spoke of earlier. It's not an exact match. No organization will have an exact match. But at Microsoft, we do use a cloud-based identity. Obviously, Azure Active Directory, we enforce device compliance. So even though all of us use our own devices, like my phone it belongs to me, but we require it to be enrolled with the company. So no other device, like if I want to check my email, if I want to access corporate data, it has to be enrolled. It has to be from a device that is enrolled. Then we obviously use things like the user risk status that he was talking about, the device risk status. So we have implemented those kind of things from the security point of view. And then the other thing we are rolling out is that there is internet-only access. What that means is there is no notion of a corporate net anymore. Everybody's assumed to be coming from outside. If you remember Clay's first slide, assume breach. So at this state, it doesn't matter where we are, which is why it's very seamless, whether I'm in the office or I'm in Orlando or I'm traveling to another country. My policies remain the same. The way I deal with the infrastructure remains the same. I don't see a difference in the way I interact with the corporate resources, because it's assuming breach all the time, even when I am in my office in Redmond. So does that make sense? So whether I'm in a hotel in Tokyo or I'm in my office in Redmond, it's exactly the same. What changes is that based on a certain set of conditions, it is able to figure out that this guy is usually not in Tokyo. So maybe I should ask for another level of validation, just because this is a little unusual. And this is something that dynamically the system would do. And in the next section, we are going to kind of look at what that means and how that's done. Does that make sense so far? So moving on to how do you now get started with this, right? I mean, at this point, what we've described is what that journey looks like. So in your mind, I hope you're visualizing, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, these are some of the steps that I can take to get there. And the good news is there are customers who've done it, so you know it can be done. And eventually, if you need more help, Clay and his team is always around to engage with you and give you more help with that. But at a very high level, the way you get started is by asking questions. And these questions are to answer the point that Paul made, that Anthony made earlier, which is that the most important part of this conversation is to understand, what are you trying to achieve? What are the risks that you are trying to control or mitigate? There is no utopia. You're never going to be in a zero risk state. So when you are planning your zero trust strategy, the most important thing is to understand what is it that your users are trying to do? What is it that your line of businesses are trying to achieve? There is no binary yes or no. There is no right or wrong answer. It's usually finding the sweet spot, or I think Anthony referred to it as the acceptable risk zone or something like that, which I found to be a very interesting phrase, right? You still have risk, but it's your acceptable risk zone. So by asking some of these questions, you will be able to determine what that looks like. And this now talks about how conditional access helps you convert those questions that you've asked and the answers that you've got into a set of conditions. So if you notice here, these conditions, they map a lot to the layers that Clay had outlined earlier, and then Anthony and Paul went a little bit more into while we were doing the demo. So we have the identity. At the top, it doesn't have to be a Microsoft identity. You can have other types of identity providers, but you have to have a condition based on an identity that you can trust. Then you have the different platforms. Again, it doesn't have to be Windows. It can be any endpoint, and Microsoft will help you manage it. I apologize for this guy jumping ahead for some reason. This gesture control, I think. Okay. And then you've got the network or the location. So like I said earlier, it can figure out if you're coming in from Redmond or you're traveling. Are you doing something like impossible travel? Something that the credit card companies use as well, that if you just signed in from Redmond and then you sign in from Orlando like 5 minutes later, that's just not okay. So it will flag that. And then which kind of apps are you coming from? The important thing there is that we don't want your users to be using anything downloaded from the internet, from the wild west of the internet. It has to be apps that you can trust, apps that you know will deploy the policies and the configuration that you have identified and defined for it. So the way it all comes together is into this conditional access engine, which takes some of those conditions. Then it takes some of the configuration that you have already configured, and then using the machine learning and the real-time evaluation, the user risk, the device risk, it applies the controls that you have defined for it on the right side. So this would be things like allowing access or blocking access. It could be just prompting for another multi-factor authentication prompt, or it could be forcing them to reset the password. It all depends on what is important for you and your organization. And it doesn't have to be one size fits all. It can be different for different users in the organization. So with that, we come to the last couple of slides that really talk about some of the concepts behind Microsoft Intune and what do some of these terms mean. So we've got the MDM. If some of you may be unfamiliar with it or might be new to it, is the management of the entire device, which means that the device has to be enrolled, and then as an IT person, you get a lot more control on that device. Most importantly, you'll be able to remove all corporate data from the device if the device is lost or the user leaves the organization or something like that. And MAM, or Mobile Application Management, as I mentioned earlier, will allow you to deploy those conditional access policies, make a check for the device compliance and all of those things, but the device itself is not enrolled. You don't have control over the entire device, just the apps on that device. So when the user leaves or the device is lost, you press a button and just the corporate data in those apps is deleted, not the personal data that is on those devices. So if I have my pictures or my own notes on the device, they stay, but anything to do with my company is gone, which is exactly what most users want, which is what most organizations want as well. And with that, we come to the notion of threat protection. So now with Windows 10, we have something called Microsoft Defender ATP, which is something built into Windows 10. So that sends signals into Intune or into Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And on the Android, iOS, Mac OS, we integrate with partners for the same signal. And what that signal does is if you have any malware, if you have any phishing attack, or if you have any sort of virus or anything that's going wrong with the device, that information is sent to the endpoint manager, it's sent to the conditional access engine, and then it can take action based on that information. So it's not just the fact that, yes, I am Mayank and I am entering my correct username password and everything else seems okay, but maybe there's a malware lurking in the background which other things may not detect or catch. That's where you need something like this to make sure that you're truly and completely protected. So what that kind of brings you to is the fact that as you look at this journey, you see that a lot of different products and technologies work together. to make this zero trust approach successful. It starts with you knowing exactly what you want to do. It then goes on to developing that consensus amongst your organization. So what we want is you as IT professionals, as the management admins, to have the confidence to go to your security administrators and have that conversation that zero trust is not just about deploying stuff on the security side. It's something that has to come from the management side as well. The device management side is equally important, or probably most important in that story. So the zero trust link that I have here up there points you to a page that has resources that describe this a little bit more in detail. We just had about 45 minutes here today. It has an ebook that goes into some of the details. There is a video on the next link that goes into at least something around the device management that you can share with maybe your leadership or other business leaders. And the last link points you to the technical documentation, which gives you how-to guides. There are several how-to guides there that go into disk encryption, into security baselines, into security tasks, app protection policies, device compliance policies, and all the concepts that we introduced today very quickly. It gives you a sense of, okay, this is how I actually implement it or deliver it in my organization. So with that, we kind of come very close to the end of our session. Clay, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, I just want to say first, thank you for coming out to this session. Huge thanks to Anthony and Paul from Bridgewater for telling their story. But we really do want to hear from you. I'll be standing up here in the front if anyone would like to give us their interpretation of zero trust or just work with us on zero trust and helping you out. I'll give you my card. Don't mind if you contact me directly. But we really do appreciate your time today and want to find out how we can help you in the future. Thank you all.